Hi, welcome to Health in Mind. My name is Salvador, and in this video we're going to be talking about training for strength versus size. There is some overlap when it comes to these two training styles, but there is a lot of misunderstandings about how the process of getting bigger muscles or just getting stronger and lifting more weight goes, because the way that you actually specifically train for those two are very different. So I'm just going to be going in depth and explaining how these processes actually work so that you can apply them to yourself in your own working out in the gym so that you can better meet your own goals and needs. So I hope you guys enjoy. Definitely be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoy this video, and let's get right into it. So first we need to define what training for strength is and what training for size is. So training for strength is going to be focused on lifting the most amount of weight possible in a specific lift or in specific lifts, whereas training for size is going to be more focused on growing the size of your muscles. So another way to say that you're training for size is to say that you are hypertrophy training, and hypertrophy just means the growth of muscle tissue or growing the size of your muscles. So if you're training for hypertrophy, you're training with the main purpose of growing the size of your muscles. So just keep that in mind that moving forward, I'm going to be using the word hypertrophy instead of training for size. Now that you have a basic understanding of what these two different training styles are and what they have to offer, now we're going to get into the specifics of how to actually apply this information in order to get that desired outcome in your own workout program. So we're going to go ahead and start off with strength training. So strength training, like I already mentioned, is focused on lifting as much weight as possible. However, one thing that people seem to neglect or people don't know is the fact that that strength is specific to the movements or lifts that you are doing. So this may sound kind of obvious, but it really isn't. An example for this is if you go over to the bench press and you lift 200 pounds, that doesn't mean that you will automatically be able to go over to the dumbbell rack, pick up two 100-pound dumbbells and bench press it or chest press it exactly the same. The movement is not the same, so the strength is going to be specific to the actual lift that you are doing, not just the muscle that it is working. So the two components that make up the process of lifting as much weight as possible are going to be neural efficiency and muscle size. So neural efficiency is essentially how much force you can produce with the existing muscle, whereas muscle size is kind of obvious. It's basically just the size of the muscle or the muscle fibers in that specific area. The two main factors that play a role in the overall neural efficiency are going to be the amount of muscle fiber recruitment and the timing of the muscle fiber recruitment. The best way to remember these two things is that the amount of muscle fiber recruitment is similar to muscle memory. So the more and more you do the lift over and over again, the more that your muscles learn how to properly contract more and more of themselves so that you can lift the weight more adequately. Whereas the timing of the muscle fiber recruitment is kind of similar to the mind-muscle connection that people say. If you know how the brain works, the more you engage in a specific behavior or patterns of thought, the easier it becomes to automatically do those things later on, automatically, because it's making the neural pathways in your brain deeper and deeper. So the same thing happens when you expose yourself to a lift over and over again. The more and more your brain learns how to efficiently lift that weight with the proper timing so that it can make sure that the weight actually gets lifted off, and the more and more automatic it becomes. As you can probably tell, if you want to increase the amount of muscle fiber recruitment and the timing of it, you just want practice. That's basically it. You can't really do it other than exposing yourself to the lift over and over again, and that's the best way to increase the neural efficiency of your lift. So the size of your muscle actually goes hand in hand with neural efficiency, and that is because the bigger your muscle is, the more muscle fibers you have available to recruit in order to produce the most amount of force possible. Notice how I said available. Just because you have bigger muscles does not mean that you are automatically stronger, because if you do not know how to properly use those muscle fibers or utilize them via neural efficiency, then you will not be able to lift as much weight as somebody else who may have smaller muscles but is much more neurally efficient than you. So if you want to really increase the amount of weight that you can lift, if you start to just plateau, then increasing your muscle size is going to help you do so, because that would give you more muscle fibers to contract, and the more muscle fibers you can contract, the more force you can produce or the more weight you can lift. So how does strength training differ from hypertrophy training? Well, strength training again is going to be solely focused on how much weight can be lifted in a specific exercise and not focused on how you look or how big your muscles are. Secondly, you're going to intentionally be using biomechanically advantageous technique when performing an exercise, or using form for an exercise that allows you to lift the most amount of weight possible. Lastly, strength training lifts should usually be done in the 1 to 6 rep range for the best strength outcomes or adaptations. So now that you know how strength training works and what it's focused on, let's go ahead and move to hypertrophy training. So the main focus of hypertrophy training is going to be increasing the size of your muscles or creating structural adaptations to the specific targeted areas, whether that be in your arms, your back, your legs, wherever. You are going to create structural adaptations via muscle growth. So there are going to be 4 main components that contribute to muscle growth. Those 4 are going to be proximity to failure, volume, rep range and load, and lifting technique. So for proximity to failure, you want to take each set from 0 to 3 reps of failure. If you don't know what actual muscular failure is, that is going not only until you can't do any more reps or feel like you can't, but until you actually do fail. In the middle of a rep, you cannot finish your repetition because your muscles will not allow for it because it is too fatigued. That is what 0 reps within failure is. And obviously 1 rep from failure, 2 rep from failure, that's how many repetitions you have left in your tank before you actually do hit failure. For volume, more volume tends to lead to more muscle growth, but only up to a certain degree. For bigger muscle groups like the back, legs, and chest, you should do anywhere from 10 to 20 sets per week, and for smaller muscle groups like the biceps, triceps, and calves, they can be worked out slightly more, but for people who have not been lifting for more than 3 to 5 years, anything more than 20 to 25 sets per muscle group usually won't be required for adequate muscle growth. Secondly, you do not substitute more volume for lower quality workouts. You need a balance between quality and volume in order to get the proper and optimal amount of muscle growth. The next component of muscle growth is going to be rep range and load. If you don't know what load is, that's just how much weight you're actually lifting, but the rep range you want to be using for hypertrophy is going to be anywhere from 6 reps to 20 reps. I personally would recommend starting somewhere in the lower range, about 6 to 10 reps, and slowly building up over time using that same weight until you're actually able to sufficiently lift up to 20 reps for multiple sets. And once you've hit that point, I would then recommend going up in weight on your exercises, but also just keep in mind you want to try to avoid excessively increasing the weight as much as you can, because that will prevent you from putting adequate tension on your muscles to induce those muscle growth or physical adaptations. The final component of muscle growth is going to be lifting technique. For hypertrophy, you want to use technique that will induce the most stress possible on the targeted muscle. So in order to do this, you want muscular inefficiency, or to induce as much mechanical tension as possible on the targeted muscle. You also want to lift with a full range of motion with controlled concentric and eccentric tempo. This does not mean fast or slow, because there are some workouts where you want to go fast, some workouts that you want to do slow. However, you just want to make sure that you are not using momentum to lift the weight, or if you are, you're using as little momentum as possible. That way it doesn't take the tension off of the targeted muscle. Now I'll quickly talk about how hypertrophy training differs from strength training. So hypertrophy training is primarily focused on increasing the size of the muscles and is not specifically focused on how much weight can be lifted. Also, for hypertrophy training, you will be intentionally using biomechanically disadvantageous technique when performing an exercise to induce the most stress to a muscle as possible. Lastly, hypertrophy training lifts should be done in the 6 to 20 rep range for the best hypertrophy outcomes, rather than a 1 to 6 rep range. So now I'm going to go over some common misconceptions when it comes to these 2 different styles of training. Firstly, contrary to what you may believe, these 2 training styles actually go hand in hand, and there is a lot of overlap when it comes to these 2, whereas some people like to think of it as black and white. You're just training for strength or you're just training for size, but that isn't true, and the benefit of utilizing components of both of these different training styles can actually lead to an increase in strength and size simultaneously. The second common misconception is that when training for hypertrophy, you're not going to get any stronger, and that when training for strength, you're not going to get any bigger. Obviously, this isn't true, but wherever you put your priority, whether that be to gain muscle or to gain strength, is where you're going to get the most benefits from at once, but that's just something to keep in mind. The third and final misconception is that if you don't want to get overly muscular, or you just want to look more toned, that you should just work out for strength. Usually women tend to be the one who think this way, and that's because they don't want to seem like overly masculine or way too muscular or something like that. Obviously there's going to be some people who want to look like that, which is totally normal and fine. But for the people who do think that way, that's going into hypertrophy training with the mindset that if I intentionally try to grow my muscles, they're going to get huge, which is not the case, or everybody in the gym would pretty much be huge. So it's going to be really hard to get your muscles to grow way more than you want them to. But if you want any kind of muscle definition or to be toned at all, being toned is just having muscle definition, which comes from lower body fat and muscle definition. So your muscles have to show in order to do that. And in order to have muscle definition, your muscles have to grow and get bigger. So if you want to do that, then you need to be doing some form of hypertrophy training. That way your muscles are growing and getting bigger so that they're more noticeable if that's what you want. So before we go, here's the 4 key points or takeaways that you want to get from this video. First, to train for strength, you should practice using higher weight and lower rep ranges specifically for the lifts you want to get stronger at. Second, to train for size, you should focus on using lower weight and higher rep ranges. Third, strength training is about recruiting as many of the currently existing muscle fibers as possible in order to produce the most amount of force. And lastly, hypertrophy training is about growing the existing muscle fibers by inducing the most stress possible on a muscle. Alright, so that's going to be it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed and that it was informative and helpful to you. Definitely be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more of these videos. Comment if you have any questions or concerns. And please share this to anybody that you think might benefit from it or that has any questions that I have answered in this video. So thank you again so much for watching this video. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one.